Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of Gold Warriors by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave. And the subtitle is called America's Secret Recovery of Yamashita's Gold. And this is a paperback. So my little paperback is kind of falling apart here. Sorry about that. Okay, so this particular book was inspired by, I guess you could call it current events, especially in the financial world, particularly in the precious metal world. So I thought this would be an interesting read to learn about a part of the history. They say history is written by the winners, right? And there is some truth to that. I don't think we can ever know the whole history of any particular topic, uh, but it's interesting to know a little bit of the section of a little window, right? Of a little area. Anyways, I hope I'm making sense. But okay, so before we begin, I hope you like what we do here and welcome everybody. Um, Please do consider checking out our other book clubs while you're on YouTube. We have the spiritual book clubs on Mondays and then health book clubs on Wednesdays. And we put all the books that we've read in the past as well as our present books on YouTube. And we have it on a playlist so you guys can just download it and listen to it when you're stuck in traffic, when you're walking your dog or jogging or whatever it is that you're doing. And we have other contents on there as well, not just book clubs. So please do check it out, like and subscribe and comment and all that good stuff. If you have a book or two that you would like us to you would like to recommend us to read, I'll leave a link in the description box below for you guys to do that. It could be a spiritual book, a health book, a financial book. We do hope you guys recommend so we can read. We love to read. Reading is a lost art, and we just love to share the knowledge. I think it's important. And then also consider signing up for our free monthly newsletter as well. And if you want to support us further, you can buy me a coffee, leave a donation. Check out the merch that we have. We have many different designs for both your fur babies, your cats and dogs, as well as for humans. So please do check it out. And we're always updating our current designs and coming up with new designs. So come back often and check them out. And then lastly, if you're local in the Los Angeles area, or if you are visiting LA area, please do come check out our healing center. We have a healing center that Nikola we use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing for both domestic cats and dogs, domestic animals, and humans. So please do check it out. We have all the information about that on our website, as well as our other services. So please do come and join us. We'd love to meet you in person and share our healing sessions with you. I think that's awesome. Okay, so this particular episode is chapter 4, part 1. And for this book, the author has a lot of endnotes at the back of the book. So what I'll do is I'll read like a page or a section or something like that in the main chapter. And then I'll go back to the back of the book and read the endnotes. Because sometimes they have paragraphs of like behind the scenes story or explanations or something like that. And I don't want to miss that. So, okay, here we go. If you have a book, you could follow with us here. If not, you can follow with us on camera here. I think I meant to say if you have a book that you purchased, you could follow with us on your book. If not, you could follow with us here. And I hope I'm making sense because I haven't had my coffee yet, so I'm a little Got a little brain fog here. Okay, I'll do my best to read without a whole lot of mistakes. Okay, here we go. All right, again, this is chapter 4, part 1. Chapter 4, Storming the Indies. Let's see here. Okay. It was a failure in Manchuria that caused the Japanese to invade China, and failure in China that caused them to invade Southeast Asia. In each instance, they thought expanding the war zone would solve the problems. How can victory mean failure? The answer is surprisingly simple. Great quantities of treasure came from each victory, but quickly vanished into the usual hiding places. So Japan's ruling elite became very much richer. Meanwhile, the public treasury was exhausted by military expenditures, and ordinary Japanese were squeezed to make up the deficit. In short, the underlying problem of a corrupt ruling elite was only aggravated by infusions of stolen treasure. Disaster lay ahead, but in a culture where conspicuous patriotism is the bottom line, few dared to speak out. Getting bogged down in China removed all restraints on military spending, so both the Army and Navy gambled on advancing farther south. Tokyo was counting on a sequence of surprise attacks. Oh, sorry, I lost my place there. Okay, Tokyo was counting on a sequence of surprise attacks, followed by a quick negotiated settlement, which would allow her to keep Taiwan, Korea, and Manchuria, while gaining at least the Philippines and Indonesia. Few Japanese officials believed they could win a protracted war with the West. However, in the autumn of 1941, Hirohito was persuaded that Japan had the advantage of surprise, and if he delayed, the opportunity would be lost. Weeks before Pearl Harbor, he was in contact with Pope Pius the 12th. I think that's a 12, if I get my Roman numeral correct. Hoping the Pope would negotiate a peace settlement at the right moment. To sweeten his bid for the Pope's favor, Hirohito had his financial advisors move $45 million into the Vatican Bank in Rome and to Vatican-controlled banks in Portugal and Spain. When it was launched, the strike south moved with stunning speed. The strike south moved with stunning speed. The day after Pearl Harbor, Shanghai's international settlement was overrun. Japanese troops landed in Siam. The government in Bangkok surrendered and obligingly declared war on the Allies. 2 days later, sailing from Singapore to block a landing on the Malay Peninsula, Britain's Prince of Wales and Repulse were sunk by Japanese planes. Japanese troops on folding bicycles moved swiftly down the Malay Peninsula as others invaded Burma and Sumatra. By the end of December, Hong Kong, Guam, and Wake had fallen, and Japan was invading the Philippines. On March 9, 1942, resistance collapsed in Java. Bataan surrendered in April 9th. Corregidor on May 6th. 5 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan controlled East and Southeast Asia. Okay, let's see what kind of endnotes we have there back in the book. Okay, here we go. Chapter 4. Okay, so the note on gambled on advancing further south, you could find that in How Loot from Manchuria and China Financed Japan's Strike South. Bix Hirohito, page 396. The note about few Japanese officials believed Japan could win the war. Prince Fushimi told Hirohito to, quote, avoid war with Britain and the United States, end quote. Bix Hirohito, page 402. The note about Hirohito and the Pope. Hirohito told Tojo in late October 1941 to contact Pope Pius XII. The Pope was an ardent anti-communist like Hitler and Hirohito. Bix Hirohito, page 421. Pius XII wanted to make the Vatican a greater force in world affairs and had already reached a political accommodation with the Nazis, giving him greater control over Catholics in Germany. Cornwell, Hitler's Pope. Hirohito hoped to cut a similar deal in Asia in return for the Pope's intercession for a peace settlement. The Vatican had been the first sovereign power to recognize Japan's puppet regime in Manchuria. The imperial family's connection with the Vatican continued after the war. Prince Asaka, overseer of the rape of Nanking, was baptized a Catholic in the early 1950s. The announcement of the baptism appeared in the New York Times. As Christopher Columbus once remarked, quote, "Gold is a wonderful thing. Whoever possesses it is lord of all he wants. By means of gold, one can even get souls into paradise." End quote. Harmiston, Gold as a Store of Value. The note about $45 million, Hirohito's secret overseas assets. Mackay, Allied Japanese Conspiracy, page 214. And Manning, Hirohito, The War Years, page 169 to 182. And 224, page 224 to 226. Okay. Excuse me. Seen as armed robbery. The 12 months of 1942 were pure hell. Japan was in a hurry and used terror to force submission. Loot amassed for Golden Lily by the Kampatai and special service units was funneled into Penang or Singapore, then carried by sea through the Spice Islands in Manila to be sorted and inventoried by the princes before the next leg north to Japan. Tokyo's policy on looting was set by Hirohito at an imperial headquarters liaison conference in a document titled Principles for the Implementation of Military Administration in the Occupied Southern Area. He directed the military to enforce, quote, "the acquisition of strategic materials, the establishment of the self-sufficiency of the occupying army, and the restoration of law and order," end quote. In plain language, acquisition meant armed robbery, self-sufficiency meant forcing local okay, I think I need some breakfast. Self-sufficiency meant forcing local populations to bear the full burden of paying for the occupation, and restoration of law and order meant using terror to suppress all opposition. These orders gave a free hand. At a meeting of the Imperial Liaison Conference in March 1942, Hoshino Naoki, head of the narcotics trade, and now Hirohito's top aide, said, quote, "There are no restrictions on us. These were enemy possessions. We can take them, do anything we want," end quote. One part of World War II that receives little attention is the financial treachery, coercion, terror, extortion, and secret betrayal. Little is written about it because prominent citizens chose to betray their own nation, their own families, rather than profit personal wealth. Financial collusion with Japan remains one of the world's most closely guarded secrets even today. While many books have been published about Nazi looting and economic conspiracy, records of Japan's looting and economic conspiracy have been removed from Western archives and databases, remain under secret classification, and will not be made public for another half-century. There must be a reason for this. Recent efforts in the U.S. Congress led to passage of Public Law 106-567 to assure public access for the first time to classified documents about Japan's conduct of the war. At the last moment, a loophole was added permitting the CIA director to decide which documents are relevant and to withhold for reasons of national security any that might reveal what the CIA was doing half a century ago. This permits the CIA to filter out all documents that might reveal unsavory American collusion with Japan in the period immediately following the war. Until those archives are fully opened, we can only see a partial picture. Even that is devastating, as we will see in later chapters. As Japan struck south, mundane materials qualified as plunder. Copper wire, oil, coal, iron, rice, dried fish, preserved meats, and salt. In Malaya, the Philippines, and Dutch East Indies, every kind of real estate was confiscated, from private homes and hotels to granaries, petroleum tent farms, and fish farms. Failure to arrange a quick truce through the Pope left no alternative but more robbery. Despite initial victories, by mid-1942, it was obvious to Prince Chichibu, his brother Prince Takamatsu, and to many others that the war would be lost militarily. Militarily. So it was more important than ever not to lose financially. Okay, let's see what kind of footnote we have back there, or endnote rather. Okay, so all right. So the note about the Imperial headquarters liaison conferences as, quote, the device, you can find that in Bix Hirohito, page 329. Quote, principles for the implementation of military administration in the occupied southern areas, end quote, was the imperial blueprint for the occupation of South Asia. Akashi Yoji Wanatabi Wataru, the architect of the Malaya military administration, December 1941 to March 1943. The quote about "we can do anything we want," Hirohito quoted in Inega Pacific War, page 155. The note about archival records of Japan's looting. See Japanese Imperial Government Disclosure Act. Reproduced in full on our CDs. It is interesting to note that the State Department received a letter from Tokyo Ambassador in Washington asking for access and review to any documents that have been designated for public release. The State Department's answer is not known. We say much more about the disappearance of Japanese records in subsequent chapters. See Tokodomi Kinui. POW forced labor lawsuits, JPRI working paper number 82. After the fall of Singapore, Chichibu established a regional headquarters of Golden Lily there, staffed with clerks, bookkeepers, and accountants. He flew north to the banking hub of Kuala Lumpur and the island of Penang, major centers for major centers for collection and transshipment of loot. In Ipoh, he made deals with overseas Chinese tin mining factories to melt down and recast confiscated gold jewelry. Ingots in many shapes from Laos, Cambodia, Siam, and Burma were being shipped by rail to Ipoh or by freighter to Penang or Singapore. Wu Qingxin was a Hokkien businessman in Ipoh who made a fortune taking a small percentage of precious metals he recast for golden lily, stolen from Burma and Siam. Because he spoke Chinese and English, the bars he cast were hallmarked in those languages, using English spelling for Cambodia instead of that country's Khmer or French names. This added to the variety of hallmarks that Golden Lily dealt with. Half a century later, hundreds of bars cast at Wu's factory in Ipoh were found deep in a cavern on Luzon by Ingarot tribesmen, who showed them to a camera crew from Asahi Television. The amazed TV crew videotaped the gold bars and drilled core samples. When these were analyzed in Tokyo, metallurgical fingerprints established where the gold originated. See Chapter 13. Ingots from Burma were in pyramid shapes, 15.5 times 15 15 and a half by 5.5 by 3.8 centimeters, each 20 carats and weighing 6.2 kilos. Gold Buddhas also arrived. Rich Burmans prepared for reincarnation by endowing pagodas or had solid gold Buddhas cast. Some Buddhist sects accumulated hoards of gold and cast Buddha images weighing up to 8 tons. These were disguised by encasing them in plaster, painted white, and decorated with painted faces. Only senior members of a sect knew that inside the plaster was solid gold. The first thing Japanese officers did at pagodas was to fracture the plaster Buddhas to see if they were gold inside. In July 1942, a gold Buddha over 15 feet tall arrived at Manila's Pier 15. It weighed so many tons, the only solution was to cut it up. But that might cause bad karma. Instead, the Buddha was lowered onto a barge and taken up the Marikina River to an airstrip called Marikina Field. There, 2 bulldozers pushed and dragged the statue into a pit, covering it with soil to dig up after the war. When those officers were transferred, it was forgotten. Decades later, this gold Buddha was rediscovered by accident when a housing development was built on Marikina Field, page 13, or chapter 13. In Kuala Lumpur, Golden Lily found vaults in Bank Negara packed with 23.97 carat bars of 6.250 kilos each, measuring 1 by 2 by 5.75 inches. Other gold was seized from Hokkien, Hakka, and Teochew communities, rich from tin mining and rubber plantations. More was extorted from Rajas and Datos in each Malay state. Tons came by rail from Cambodia in bars measuring 15.5 by 5 by 3.7 centimeters, rated 92.3% pure. Through 1942, 1943, and 1944, Prince Chichibu and his staff spent the dry season in the Philippines, then moved to the relative comfort of Singapore when typhoons began battering Manila. Chichibu had contracted tuberculosis in Manchuria in the late 1930s and had to avoid the rainy season in the Philippines. TB also provided cover for his disappearance from Japan. There it was announced that the prince had left the army for medical reasons and was recuperating on an estate at the foot of Mount Fuji, nursed by his wife. In a memoir published long after her husband's death, Princess Chichibu said he spent the war years in such total isolation that he was seen by his own brothers only on 2 or 3 occasions. In between, nobody could say where he was. A number of Japanese and Filipinos have attested to the prince being in Manila, adding that they saw him spitting blood into his handkerchief, a telling detail because his tuberculosis was not widely known. Despite many warnings, the Japanese assault took governments, bankers, and citizens by surprise. Before Japan invaded the Philippines, anxious Americans asked the State Department about sending home wives and children. State refused to give frank advice. Later, it defended this lamely before Congress, saying it did not want to prejudice ongoing peace negotiations by sending the wrong message, evacuating women and children. So many mothers and children spent the next 4 years in concentration camps. Dutch colonials were especially anxious. By the summer of 1940, they could no longer go home as the Netherlands were occupied by the Nazis. There was safe haven in Australia, where many British colonials already had fled. But the Dutch government in exile in London declared that Dutch colonials must stay put. In Java and Sumatra, thousands of Dutch men and women were called for military duty or civilian defense throughout the archipelago, whose islands sprawl over 780,000 square miles. They were forbidden to send money out. Yet, in the final months of 1941, the Dutch colonial government covertly moved its remaining official gold reserves, worth 120 million guilders, from Java to Australia, America, and South Africa, aboard chartered merchant ships such as the Java and the Frontis. Some 250 million guilders worth of gold were moved earlier to the U.S. to clear payments for American weapons and aircraft. These transfers were kept secret to instill false confidence. Many colonial government officials were caught napping. Philippine President Manuel Quezon, an intimate friend of General Douglas MacArthur, was vacationing at the mountain resort of Baguio when he received a phone call on December 8, informing him that the Pacific War had started. MacArthur himself was caught with his military aircraft parked in the open at Clark Field, where nearly all were destroyed by Japanese bombers from Taiwan. On December 22nd, the Japanese landed in Ligayan Gulf. The next day, MacArthur declared Manila an open city and withdrew U.S. and Filipino forces to Bataan and Corregidor. Boats carried munitions, food, and medicines to the island. MacArthur ordered his G2, Colonel Charles Willoughby, also to move the contents of the Philippine National Treasury, the Philippine Central Bank, the private deposits from National City Bank. 23 big Mosler safes that Willoughby's team emptied were later used by Golden Lily to hide gold bars in ventilation shafts at Fort Santiago for recovery after the war. The Philippine National Treasury consisted of over 51 metric tons of gold, 32 metric tons of silver bullion, 140 tons of silver coins, and $27 million in U.S. Treasury notes, plus an undisclosed amount in bonds, precious gems, and Treasury certificates. Okay, let's stop here for now and see what kind of endnotes we have back there. What page is that? Page 47. Okay. All right. The note about the official history of Prince Chichibu's life during the war is Princess Chichibu's, the silver drum. The note about Dutch colonials that were ordered to stay put. Dutch citizens were forbidden to leave Indonesia or to move their assets overseas. The Dutch government, meanwhile, moved official gold reserves to safety. Hagar's, De Telegraaf, 20 November 1999, from documents in Egemen Rijks Archief. Sorry, butchered that. Whatever that is. The Hague. Okay. The note about National City Bank holdings, you could find that in Edward Michaud. Gold is also ballast online. The note about Philippine National Treasury. Some sources say it was taken by sub to Australia, others to the USA. Interesting. Oh, 48. Did I read that? No, I didn't. Okay. I get my head straight here. All right, continuing. The gold alone was worth $40 million at the time. National City Bank held private deposits of 2 metric tons of gold, along with gems, currency, and precious metals in safe deposit boxes. It took safe deposit boxes. It took 4 days to move all this from Manila to Corregidor using Navy tugboats and small pleasure yachts. The job was completed on December 27, 1941. Willoughby's wife helped with the inventory and was surprised that the gold did not glitter. Quote, it was dull and not recognizably gold at all. Most of it was dark brown with some chunks of dirty yellow. Some of the variously sized bars were wrapped. Some were without wrapping. Some of the variously sized read that sentence again. Some of the variously sized bars were wrapped. Some were without wrapping. Some had tickets attached. Others had figures and weights stamped into them. I had to use both hands to lift a bar about the size of a pound of butter. A cube of gold, 12 by 12 by 12 inches, weighs 2,000 pounds. Oh my goodness. Wow, that's incredible. This treasure was stored in Corregidor's tunnel complex. Exactly 1,430 tons of silver pesos were placed in the Malinta tunnels. 2 tons of private gold were stored inside the stockade. The 51 tons of government gold, 2,542 ingots of 20 kilos each, along with government securities, were placed in laterals of the Navy tunnel on the south side of the Malinta tunnels. At the end of April, 115 tons of silver coins were dumped into San Jose Bay, where they were dispersed by tides. On February 3rd, 1942, the USS Trout, an American Tambor-class submarine, arrived at Corregidor with a cargo of anti-aircraft rounds, food, and medical supplies. After unloading, the skipper said he needed ballast to replace the cargo. MacArthur decided to put treasure aboard. 2 trucks were sent to the stockade to bring the private gold. Then 16 tons of silver pesos were loaded, along with currency, stocks, bonds, and treasury certificates. The Trout continued its patrol, sinking 2 Japanese vessels before heading home to Pearl Harbor, where the gold was turned over to the San Francisco Mint. When Corregidor fell, the Japanese Navy recovered the remaining treasure and shipped it to Tokyo. It never occurred to the defenders to wall up this treasure in a side passage to hide it. As each country was overrun, tens of thousands of colonials were trapped. They were ordered to take only 2 small suitcases and go to collection points for transfer to internment camps. Kapataye units immediately seized all property, except for residences chosen for high-ranking officers or civil administrators. Special squads arrived in vans to strip these homes bare. Pianos, paintings, light fixtures, kitchen appliances, flush toilets, sink clothings, and food stocks were taken to warehouses. Copper wiring and lead plumbing was ripped from walls. Jewelry, candlesticks, tableware, and picture frames were placed in oil drums and taken to sorting centers for melting down. Hardwood floors and doors were torn out. In the Philippines, Carlos Romulo, later ambassador to the UN, told how this was done on the island of Leyte. Quote, the army trucks came to every door and soldiers entered the houses taking everything that might be of use, throwing all else out the windows or firing it there. All their loot was taken on ships to Japan, leaving the Philippines stripped, end quote. In Manila, Japanese soldiers moved through upper-class and middle-class neighborhoods, kidnapping pretty wives and daughters who were taken to hotels set aside for high-ranking Army and Navy officers. Over several weeks, mothers and daughters were raped repeatedly until they were in a stupor, servicing up to 50 men a day. Oh my gosh. The Kampatay offered to return kidnapped family members in exchange for hidden treasure or securities, or information about neighbors and relatives. At hospitals, nurses were sought as mistresses for Japanese officers. In poor families with no assets, wives and daughters were herded into brothels for non-commissioned officers and ordinary soldiers. Wow, that's pretty brutal. Let's see what kind of endnotes we have back there. Okay, so the note about the Willoughby account. The Willoughby account comes from Michaud. The note about Philippine bullion and currency seized by the Japanese army and remitted to Tokyo. You could find that in Steinberg, Philippine Collaboration in World War II, page 88. The note about many eyewitness accounts of civilians stripped bare by the Japanese forces. One of those is Scoville, Japanese ginger jars, page 148. The note about other loot was taken on ships to Japan. That was from Romolo's quote, the United Nations Information Office, Japan's Record, and World Security, page 43. And the note about civilian women and girls forced into prostitution by the Japanese. At the Seagrave Hospital in northern Burma, several staff nurses were taken away by Kampuchea officers, remaining sex slaves for the next 3 years. Wow. Oops. Okay, let's see here. On the eve of the invasion, many Dutch colonials hastily sold homes and emptied bank accounts, buying gold biscuits or gems that could be tucked in a cheek. Some buried valuables in their gardens. Watchful servants retrieved them only to have them taken by the Japanese, who paid repeated visits for this very reason. Other Dutch brought tiny hoards to freighters, passenger ships, inter-island ferries, and private yachts, hoping to escape to Australia. Although some vessels reached safety, most were captured or sunk. Few saw their valuables again. Like British in Malaya or Burma, some British had holiday homes in mountain towns of Java or Sumatra where they could escape the heat. Here they fled, hoping to be overlooked. But Kampuchea came to the smallest kampong, locking these cottages. To be so methodical over such a vast region required a very large organization and considerable forethought. Panic hit bankers and private citizens alike as they sought ways to hide wealth. Bankers called in bearer bonds, listed numbers, sent the list to the home country, and destroyed the bonds. Serial numbers of high denomination banknotes were recorded and the bills burned. When time ran out, smaller denominations were burned without listing the numbers. In Malaya, $104 million in bonds were processed this way. In Singapore, the $4 million in privately owned jewels and small valuables were received by government agents and shipped to Australia. After noting serial numbers, Singapore banks burned $75 million in currency and shipped another $39 million to India. When Japanese marched in, they brought a phalanx of officials from Yokohama Specie Bank and Bank of Taiwan, a Japanese government bank, who were to sequester all bank operations. Those from Yokohama Specie Bank worked in territories under Army control. Those from Bank of Taiwan in areas under Navy control. Japanese bankers who could speak Mandarin, Cantonese, Hokkien, Hakka, or Taichu were assigned to monitor Chinese-owned banks and pawn shops. Earnest officials made desperate efforts to hide and destroy government tax ledgers. Earnest officials made desperate efforts to hide or destroy government tax ledgers, property ledgers, and internal bank records. But the Japanese tortured or frightened bureaucrats and bank managers to reveal secret account information and business practices. To open safes or vaults, or to turn over hidden safe deposit keys. Collaborators were discovered among native clerks, disgruntled targets of racist abuse by their colonial masters. Oh, sorry. They provided tax rolls and ledgers and identified wealthy local residents for fleecing. In Singapore, all foreign bank holdings were confiscated. On March 8, 1942, managing directors of all commercial banks in the Dutch East Indies were forced to hand over the contents of their vaults. In this first sweep, the Japanese took 52 million guilders in cash from banks in Java alone. Another 12 million guilders were seized from import-export firms in Java and the neighboring islands of Madura. They even sealed pawn shops and small native banks. This was done by staff. This was done by staff from the Bank of Japan, Bank of Taiwan, Mitsui Bank, and Cannon Bank, led by Yamamoto Hiroshi, a senior Bank of Japan officer who served as controller of the Office of Alien Property. Everything was turned over to Prince Chichibu's Golden Lily organization for inventory and shipment to Japan. Okay, let's see what kind of endnote we have here. Okay, so the note about Japanese liquidation of Indonesian banks was carried out by Yamamoto Hiroshi. You could find that in LMJ Bokheim de Beldinar. Sorry, butchered that word. September 1995, Krotoska, Japanese occupation of Malaya, page 214 and 215. And then the note about amounts seized by the Japanese from Java banks and import-export firms, see Bogheim. Wow, that was short. Okay. All right. Across Southeast Asia, mid-level bank employees were herded into internment camps and escorted to work each day. Fearing for their lives, they soon handed over the remaining secrets. Those who refused to cooperate and were thought to have deceived the Japanese were turned over to the Kamputai for special treatment. Journalist Jos Hagers of the Dutch newspaper De Telegraaf, who was born in a Japanese prison camp in Sumatra, has investigated many accounts of Japan's looting in Indonesia, including that of eyewitness Williams Giroms. As a boy of 15, Giroms watched while a Japanese said to be a brother of Emperor Hirohito visited his internment camp. While the prince was there, the father of Girom's best friend, a director of the Palembang branch of Java Bank, was taken to the commandant's office for interrogation. Informers had told the Japanese that he had burned a large quantity of guilders and hidden a lot of bullion to prevent its confiscation. When he refused to answer questions, he was brutally beaten in full view of internees, including young Giroms, who later died of his injuries. The Japanese recovered far more gold than they thought possible. It became evident that there was more gold and platinum in private hands across Southeast Asia than anyone knew existed. Some had been hoarded for many generations, but some was new. During the 1930s, the Great Depression made people everywhere shy away from paper currency. By the late 1930s, anxiety about the intentions of Germany and Japan made gold a vital asset. Governments hoarded gold against the likelihood of war. Increased demand made it profitable to open new mines, including the Tijikotok mine in Java, where gold was extracted by tunneling as deep as 3,000 feet, approaching the depth of the deepest mines in South Africa. In the Philippines also, 1939 was a record year for gold production from Benguet mines northeast of Manila. The Japanese quickly reactivated these mines with slave labor. With a limitless supply of slaves, they did not have to worry about cost or risk. When the Japanese 25th Army took control of mines on Bengkalis Island off Sumatra, gold production jumped tenfold to over 400 kilos per year. Similar increases were recorded in all other mines during the occupation. Not all Southeast Asia's wealth was acquired at gunpoint. Whenever possible, it was simpler to purchase it with a scrip. By the end of the war, the amount of currency in circulation was 7 times normal. First, the Army and Navy distributed their own scrip in each country, valued at 1 yen to 1 Straits dollar, doubling the value overnight. Because the scrip was poor quality with no serial numbers, it was easy to counterfeit. Such large quantities were distributed that it lost more value from oversupply. In an orgy of false sincerity, the Japanese rushed in to fix the unfixable. New scrip was issued by the Southern Development Bank to replace the military scrip. So victims were defrauded twice. Each note bore the printed notice, quote, face value guaranteed, and, end quote, and, quote, backed by a giant reserve, end quote. Wow. Okay, let's see. Let's stop here for now and see what the end note has for us. Okay, so the note about Jos Hagers was contacted by Giromes with his story. She kindly passed along her findings to us. The note about Tijikotok, butchered that word, sorry about that. It's the mine, DWN Creek Sr. and Philip Clark, 43 Special Mission Online. The note about increased gold production under Japanese occupation, especially at the Bengkalis Island mine, C. Borkheim. The note about Japanese military script. We reproduce originals on our CDs. The examples from Hong Kong are especially beautiful and intricate. Other occupation script was drab, but all promised backing and redemption. The note about, because some of the script was so simple, counterfeiters would not have much difficulty reproducing it. They were warned against their craft. Tremble and obey, read the warnings. Kratoska, you could find that in Kratoska, Japanese occupation of Malaya, page 210. And then the note about guaranteed and giant reserve. These are the words appearing on the Hong Kong script we reproduce on our CD. Thanks to the Reparation Association of Hong Kong for its description of the Japanese Army yen, backing in materials they presented at a Tokyo conference in 1999. They're deeply involved in efforts to force the government of Japan to redeem the script, but have so far failed. What an interesting story. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Oh, sorry. Little OCD here. My little paperback's falling apart. It would be good to have a hardback, but I think they cost a lot. I didn't look at the price. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed that little section and its history. And we will continue next time in our next book club. So we will see you there. Okay, hope you guys all have a great day, great afternoon, great evening, wherever you guys are. And we'll see you again. Okay, bye-bye now.